Good morning, Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're at the bottom of page 1348. Aleph Shin Mem Ches. Continuing coming to the conclusion and continuing the Torah of the Maggid, which, as I have pointed out, is several hundred pages long. But the Rebbe Rashab is tying everything back together to all the way back to the Maggid. The last time that he went back to the Maggid was on page 896. And in truth, the whole thing began, the story of the Maggid's Torah, which I summed up yesterday, was on page 700 and where was it? 700 and yeah, 790. 790. Shin Sadik, Tav Shin Sadik. So definitely worthwhile to look back at that Torah because the Rebbe Rashab is bringing together a lot of the pieces. I'm trying to elaborate on them. So to briefly sum up what we learned yesterday is, so we're learning about really the contrast to understand what the Maggid is talking about in the Elam HaKisei, in the world of the throne, in the world of Bria, is the neshamas of Bria that are on their own. They don't feel that full revelation of the divine. So the contrast to the neshamas of Atzilus. So this is the contrast, as we've been elaborating earlier, that neshamas of Ma or neshamas of Atzilus, their main thing is Oir. They draw down Oir. They draw down Oir into darkness as well, and they engage with the darkness, but they're not bound by it. Neshamas of Bria that now the Maggid is talking about the end of the Torah. Keep in mind that he did talk about the higher level, Adam Elyon, earlier in his Torah, when he was talking about how to draw down from godliness into Atzilus. But now, as the Rebbe Rashab made it clear on page 896, he says clearly that now he's talking about the neshamas of Biyah after the Parsa, or after the Tzimtzum, because like he made it clear also that it's also in macrocosm, Biyah HaKlolim, that we're talking about the reality post-Tzimtzum, that even there we also can connect to godliness, because that's the big question. It's one thing that neshamas of Atzilus dwell in the domain of light, that they connect to the divine and higher levels of the divine. It's another that a state of concealment can connect. And that's what he's talking about here. Like he says clearly, he says, that first he's talked about the kolza, he says I just want to read the exact words. He says, I'm reading on page 896. That's the Maggid. That on Dmusa Kisei, and the likeness of the throne that the Cheskel saw, which means where godliness is concealed, he says, the Masha Kosev Kedem, what the Maggid said earlier, that they made Simtsumim in order for there to be a unification between the Adam and godliness. There he says, there he talked about the supernal man of Atzilus, which is B'chinas Adam le'elyon. And the same thing with Neshamas of Atzilus, that are Bedugma Shalamayla. They are similar to, and they mirror that which is above. The Kan Mevayir B'chinas Dmus Adam Debriya. Here he's talking about Dmus Adam, the likeness of the man, of the Adam in Bria, where there it goes through concealment, so mechusa, to the point of the parsa, of the partition that conceals. And even there, you also can elevate. There is an onan, like we learned in the previous page, onan, a cloud of darkness. And even there, we can climb from the bottom up, and that's the Aveda Sabirurim, of Ban. You go from the bottom up to the point that we actually reveal the Adam, and commensurate to our work from below it was reflected and mirrored the Hamshacha from above. That's the point. Hashem Tzilcha, God is our shadow, which means that when we get stimulated and we awaken something from below, we in turn stimulate and awaken something from above, and even more so, the Gamzes, that the Kalim below create an image. They shape the energy of divine energy itself that manifests in those kelim. Kemayim aponim el aponim, like the reflection of a face in water. So our face below is reflected back to us from above, because God envisioned the neshamas. So when we now in turn do our work from the below, so God's envisioning us is stimulated and responds in kind. Now that's in the oyer that relates to the containers. How about the higher levels of oyer? Remember, we learned the Reusah v'shuv is not just in the oyer in the containers, but also higher levels. So he says the levels that are higher, there it works the other way around. The oyer of the godliness creates an image and shapes the kelim below. And he actually spoke about that back on page if you go back to page 964 and 965, he spoke about kamayim aponim leponim both ways, that the face below creates a reflection from the face above, and the other way around, that the face above creates a reflection that comes from the face below. Basically, as I explained yesterday, and I want to reiterate, that in the beginning of creation, there's an expression of Chassidus that says, since Rosh Hashanah, what do? God waits for us to crown him as king. So the question is, what happened the first Rosh Hashanah? The human being was just created the sixth day of creation on Rosh Hashanah, first Rosh Hashanah, but who stimulated God to create? So there's an expression brought from Chassidus, from Kabbalah, it's called halos man mineu bei. That the first time, only once, that God himself envisioned what neshamas would look like, how those neshamas would be stimulated to want a relationship with God. Like I mentioned, he brings from the Magid on page, just want to point it out, on page 902. So he brings like this, that the father envisions the child, and he envisions how the child is going to stimulate him at some point. So initially, the first time is God was the one that stimulated. The kamayim aponim comes from God's face. God's face imagined the face of his child or the face of neshamas, how they in turn will stimulate from the bottom up, and they will stimulate the face of God. So which reflection is reflecting whom? First, we reflect what God envisioned, and then in turn, God reflects what we create and what we generate from below. And then he says, and from the top down, that's Torah. The kelim don't create an image in that. Rather, it's the divine energy that creates the image within the keli, as we shall explain with God's help soon in the inyan of Torah. And that's where we stopped. This is like 7 lines from the bottom of page 1348. And we're going to continue from there. And now we continue. Everything in parentheses is the Rebbe Rashab. Everything outside of the parentheses is the Magid's Torah. And the full Magid's Torah, if you want to see it, is an Er Torah, but it's also cited throughout Ayin Beis, as I read yesterday, some parts of it. That's really what the last over 500 pages entails. So from page, what did I say, 390, right? 790, and we're now at 1348. So we're talking here a good 348, 548, over 550 pages. To be exact, the whole Magid. The actual last parentheses was 450 pages, but who's counting, right? But the bottom line is it's a big, big section of Ayin Beis, because out of 1,300 pages, 500 pages are dedicated all to this Magid in elaboration of it. Okay, so let's continue now. 7 lines from the bottom, or 6 lines, from the bottom of page 1348. You can follow the text at ayinbeis.com. It's the last word on the line. The line begins, Va'adarabe. It says, now continue the words of the Magid. So continuing the parentheses, what did he say? That when a person, the tzaddik, is ma'erer, ava from below, And when he says tzaddik, clearly doesn't just mean tzaddik neshamas of Atzilus, because he is talking here about neshamas of Biyah. But we said neshamas of Biyah, first of all, have also high-level souls. And second of all, the word tzaddik can be referred in general terms to Amacholim tzaddikim, to everyone doing avodah. So he says, okay, so commensurate like the shadow, we generate from below through our work. So there he says now, when a person brings himself with a great refinement, he's very refining himself in a very powerful way. So just as it went from the top down, it started with godliness, who then created many tzimtzumim concealments, derech kama elamus, and traveled through the worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya. So now he's talking about how we reconnect from the bottom up, that when a person separates themselves from materialism and they start connecting themselves to the divine, like we learned, like we read yesterday, that a person retraces the steps. Just want to go back to the actual language that he used. Retraces the steps, step by step, like we said, a progressive elevation through the Avedus HaBerurim. So what is he doing? He's now climbing, going upward. And remember we said that first step is that we take our material lives, and instead of it being directed toward our own self-need, self-indulgence, we're directing it to be a keli telekus, l'shem shamayim, like we learned before. So it's all becoming containers. What happens then? That creates in turn the next level of Rotzei V'Shuv, that the Oir should also now go up to higher levels, that the Birur Eichel M'Teicheichel, not just Birurim from the waste that we take from materialism, from Yesh to Ayin, but the Ayin itself, the Oir itself, then goes up to higher levels. And the Aliyah B'Bchinas HaKelim, the Kelim of Atzilus, now are elevated to get an Oir that's even higher than the Oir that was in the Kelim. That's level 2. And level 3, that the Oir itself goes all the way to the Etzema Oir. So now he's going to say all this is indicated in the Torah of the Maggid. He's going to explain now how. So he says now, so now we just said that this refinement brings the L'mayla M'kol ha'elamus. What does that mean? It means that you began in the lowest of worlds, but now the refinement, you refined your containers, and as such, you've expanded your ability to contain higher levels. So now you're climbing to L'mayla M'kol ha'elamus. So the Rebbe Rashab says that's the level, the second level. V'hu b'chinas reusah deliba mili b'shamayim v'im chalei chafatzti. Shezeu harotzei da'atzilus. Till now we were talking about the rotzei and the yearning and the longing from Biyah to Atzilus. Now the next step is you're going higher than the worlds of Biyah. You're going from the world of Kisei, of the throne, of the concealment, into the world of Atzilus. And now, remember, our Aveda below also generates that Atzilus also gets stimulated, that the Kelim of Atzilus now want to have more as well. And that's called the level of Reusah Deliba. The first level he referred to earlier in Ayin Beis, and I'll refer you to the pages, page 1019, and the bottom of page 1027 in volume 2. So he said there are 3 levels of Ava. Avas Elam, Ava Rabba, and Ava B'Tainugim. So Avas Elam is that we go from a material world, the Birurim, we clarify, we separate from the waste, from the nutrients, and we elevate and direct and create Kalim to a Lakus. So Biyah has now been turned, the Yesh, the concealment has been refined. That in turn causes that the Kalim of Atzilus and Atzilus should now go to the second level, Ava Rabba. That's called Reusah Deliba. That's the desire of the heart. It's a deeper level of love. That's not the love of God that comes from first, okay, instead of loving myself, I love God, but in godliness itself, you're climbing to the next level. Then there's the level of Ava B'Tainugim. We learned that earlier about the tzaddik. That's the Ava of pleasure, the highest level. That's going to be the Oir itself reaching into the Etzema Oir. So we have Biyah to Atzilus, Kalim of Atzilus to higher levels of Oir, and Oir itself to the Etzema Oir. And all this is from the bottom up, and all in the level of Havayu Elikim, the refinement step by step. Einoid, he's going to mention later, but right now he's talking about the main Avodah, like we discussed, is Havayu Elikim, that the concealment should should shed the concealment in order to bring Oir, and then higher levels and higher levels. So the second level is B'chol ha'elmes b'chinas Reusah d'liba, shezeu ha'rotze d'Atzilus. U'kamoshen is bar le'el dibur ha'maschal mimana. Like it was explained earlier, this is volume 2. Mimana, be'inyan amol Hashem alekecha, shezeu bir oichel meteicheichel. I'll explain in a moment what that means. That we discussed there about Mol Hashem Alekecha, that God will circumcise you, that is the second level of bitter, not bitter waste from the food, or the food from the waste, but the food from the food. In Gedusha itself, like Shabbos, where in the holiness, in Eir itself, you reach, in the Kalim of Atzilus, you're reaching higher levels of Eir. It's like the second meal of Shabbos. So what did he explain back there? So if you go back there, you'll see on page 1056, they taken it below. Let me see, a minute, Aleph involved, 1 second. So there he explained like this, that there are 2 verses. One verse says, Umaltem es orlas levavchem. You shall circumcise the blockage of your heart. Orla refers to the block. So what does that mean? That bris milah is not just a circumcision physical, it's also a spiritual avodah. That when there's a block in the heart, umartem, you should remove that block. That's the work we do in removing the concealments, as he explained there. That's birur of pselis metech eichel or eichel metech pselis. Since we live in a state of concealment, and the divine sparks are embedded and trapped in a material world, so what do you need to do? You need to remove the concealment, like he said. You need to remove the hasid, he said before, to remove the concealments and refine it, so it should be able to, the flow of energy should be able to enter. But that's the first level. Then there's another pasuk that says, Umol Hashem Elekechem es orlas levavchem. Umol Hashem Elekecha es levavcha, rather. That God will circumcise you. So that question is, what's the difference? One is Aravayde from a Matlamayl, and that in turn will bring another level of birur in Atzilus, eichel meteich eichel, that God will remove a higher level of concealment. Not the concealment as in darkness, but relative to the Kalim in Atzilus, to be able to reach even a higher level of Oyer that it would have reached only through the being Kalim to the regular Oyeris of Atzilus. And that's like the second. So that's what he says is the Rotzeh in Atzilus. And then comes one higher level, says the Magid. You know what? Let me stop here before I go to the next level. And if anybody wants to ask anything. Okay. And then the Magid continues.
I just want to have a question. Women automatically have that level, and man has to be, triple circumcised, so to speak, to do it, and women automatically get it.
Who said that?
Women
just don't have to have this. Yeah. The women only don't have physical circumcision, but they also have avodah. They also say v'haftas Hashem elakacha b'chol avavcha b'chol nafsha b'chol meidecha.
Yeah, but we have an advantage.
We're not talking about physical circumcision here. We're talking about spiritual avodah.
So they have to get the spiritual circumcision.
Everybody has that.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's what I'm asking.
Suggesting that women don't have any work to do?
No, I'm just trying to say we get this tremendous gift.
We're talking about physical circumcision is what a man needs.
Fine. And then, at that point, and the person deserves it, they get the high ones. They the women get the second and third also. Women don't need the first. That's it.
We're not talking about physical here. We're talking about the heart.
I realize that. Yeah.
The block of the heart. Look, yeah. Okay. So now he goes to the next level. The next words of the Magid are, Achdus ima yizbarach. So you see here, every line is precise. If you just read it on your own, you'd say, okay, you refine yourself and you go higher than the worlds and you become one with God. But the Rebbe Rashab is showing that each line is adding something. It's not just another poetic line. That now becoming unified with God is the next stage where the unification becomes complete. Till now, we've been talking about that we come from darkness, we then clarify and we start elevating and getting connected. Then the next level, which is birurim from darkness to light. Then we go from in the Kalim of Atzilus to go to higher levels of light. And now he's saying the next level is becoming reunited with God. And he says, so what is that level? So he says, it was explained before in the Maimer Boyal Pari, again, volume 2. Now he refers us to page 837. It's also all within this subject matter. So what does he say there? So there, I want to look it up, but there he talked about that in the kavanas of serving God itself is a kavana chitzenis, where our intention is toward godliness, but then comes a higher level called kavana pnimi shebemayach, where a person has become so absorbed and so consumed with godliness, similar to what we learned about mutva murgish muskel, that first it begins that you see that God is good for you, serves your needs, provides you life and sustenance and health. Then you come to realize that God is beyond just providing you, and you start connecting to a deeper level. Then there's the level where he says that kavana pnimi shebemayach is where you're really completely consumed with godliness. So this is now an even higher level in unification with God. That's what the Rebbe Rashab is saying. Give me 1 second here. Tov, Lamed Zayin. Yeah. So this is a long discussion back in, it actually began even earlier. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, page 817, 818 he started. Pnimis HaMechin.
Looks like the mimer begins on tough lamb.
No, the page is right here in the bottom. It says the Maimer Boyal Pare is on page 837. I'm just pointing out that the subject begins on page 12, 817, 818, 819. But he does refer to page 837 here. Just a minute. Okay, on page 825 is where he brings a kavana primi shebemayach. What mimer is that? That's Va'era. And then the next mimer, not sure why he doesn't take us to the Va'era, but so be it. 837. 1 minute. Actually, Yala Derech Kol Ha'ilmus, right? Wow. Okay, to fully understand this, you really have to go back. 1 second. Yeah, at the bottom of 837, he actually says it explicitly. That's why he does. He says to be one with God to the point that he completely gets nullified. He says, "Hainu ba'aveidet b'chinas pnimis hamechin." That was explained before in chapter 400. Good. Shilasha b'biyah. One opinion. Okay. I'm just looking if there's anything there that's worthwhile quoting here.
Does he use the term bittul ayesh at this point?
What is this Inyan of Bechinas Ruach Rash Ve'esh? It mentioned in the Torah of the Maggid at 896 as well.
You have to read there in volume 2. There's a whole 3 Maimarim that talk just about that. It's a whole topic. 3 levels in the elevation of Avodah, which is all part of the Maimer, actually, the Mittler Rebbe about Lasovet Tzadikai B'Tiyufta is brought there. So you have to look in Ayin Beis. There's a whole flow on that.
Okay.
You have to begin, if you want to learn it, you have to learn it inside there. There it starts, there it talks about it. Starts on page 812 and then goes more intensely into it on the next mimer after that, where he starts here. It's a big topic here. $812, and then he goes deeper on page 822. But since he's not bringing it here, I'm not going to go into it here. So now there's another way, he says. So we're talking now the third level of an aliyah, we have become one. So to just make this a little more palatable, I'll say this. When a person born in this world with an ego and an independent consciousness, like we said, they begin their work in chashchus, in darkness. The first thing you know in your life, and every morning when you wake up, is your own needs. You need avodah, you need work to direct yourself and direct all your activities toward godliness. That's a fact. So it doesn't happen quickly, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in full transformation. As much as a person may want to become one with God, but we see, like in davening, you don't begin with Shema Nesrei. You begin with Moida Ani and the blessings in the morning, and then Psukkah de Zimra, and then Birchas Krishma, Birchas Yetzer, Birchas Krishma, Shema Nesrei. The whole process and journey, generally considered a four-rung journey, 4 steps. Like the 4 steps of the rungs of the ladder of Yaakov, of the ladder that stood on the ground and it went up into the heavens. So a journey like that is a intense and exerted journey that requires a lot of work. So it's nice to put on paper and say, okay, a neshama has come down to this world and now it just reunited with its creator. No, so it goes through steps. So I talked about 4 steps. Here he's talking about 3 general steps. That first you have to shed the ego of the yesh. The yesh, if it's focused on yourself and your needs, as I mentioned yesterday, there's no room for God. So the first thing is you have to empty yourself a bit and just allow something in, even on a very basic level. Then, once you're opened up, like I gave the example in mediation, if 2 people are strangers or at war with each other or don't have the same interests, the first thing is you need to open up a communication line. You need to open up a line of conversation, because without that, there's nothing going on. Once you do that, then you can start strengthening and building the relationship. So step 2 would be, okay, now we know each other. Now we communicate with each other. Now I want to get to know more of you. So our work stimulates from above. So there's a give and take, like I said, cause and effect, call and return and response, a call and a response. And then we go to the next level, Reusah deliba, like going b'chol avavcha, b'chol nafshecha, and then b'chol meidecha, but second level. Then now the kelim are kelim to godliness. So now we want to get higher levels of divine consciousness and divine transcendence. So that's going up to the next level in Atzilus. Then comes the next level where you really want to become one. Let us bond. So it's like after dating, you're now ready to marry. And marriage, in this case, Achdus, is where you are completely bonded with the other to the point of a total union. So even though he doesn't say it, but relatively speaking, it's like Shema Nesrei compared to the earlier levels of prayer, where you stand Avdekam, like we learned earlier, completely subsumed, dissolved, and consumed with godliness. So he said, Agam Yeshleimer can also say that this third level, now we're talking about the Rotze and the Oyer, not the Rotze and the Kalim of Atzilus, and not the Rotze and Biyah and the Elam Akise to go to Atzilus. So the first one is Birur and Pselis, the Birur of Echel Metech Pselis, from the Yesh of Biyah to the Ayin of Atzilus. The second is the Kalim of Atzilus, reaching deeper levels of higher levels of Oyer. And the third we learned earlier is the Rotze in the Oyer itself, like he said on the top of the page, Atzmus Shegama Rotze Ba'er, line 2. wants to get to the source of the oir, all the way to etzem oir, as we learned earlier. And that we learned by tzaddikim is the avodah shezel b'chinas ava b'tainugim, not ava selam, not ava rabba reusah deliba, but now the third level ava b'tainugim, where you're completely consumed with desire and pleasure, and completely oneness with the divine. As we learned earlier, it's no longer mutva, murgish, or even muskal. It's muskal on the highest level, that the emotions, shalach to shalach hasa'im, that the emotions catapult the mind, that they're all gazing at the glow in the forehead and the shin ayin, the 370 energies that are coming from arich and atik. So it's a total absorption, like when you're completely consumed, completely dissolved in the awe and in the majesty and the grandeur of godliness, as we learned earlier. And that's what he says, Zia Achdus Ime Yizbarach. So there's two ways he explains it. One is the Kavana Primi Shebameya that we learned back in Maimer of Boy, in volume 2, and the Rotche B'chinas Ave B'tainugim, which if you look earlier, it's on page 1028, where he first mentions Ave B'tainugim in the context of these three stages. Okay, any questions before I continue?
So you have at that level you have Pinimus Amayach, which is a Chabad thing, and at the same time you have Ava, a high Ava, but Tainugim, and the Tainig is your Tainig, or Tainig is the Abish's Tainig. How do you have those things at the same time? I can't even I don't even come close to understanding this whole thing.
Do you know what Ava B'tainugim is?
Not exactly. That's what I mean.
Oh, okay. So we learned earlier that in love, there's many levels of love. Let's just talk even on a human level. In human terms, you can love somebody, but it's on a very basic level. It's based on what you understand of each other. Two people relate to each other and they connect. And this can be in marriage, it could be in friendship, and they truly love each other. It's called Avas Elam, which means it's based on Pitam Vadas. It's a logical, rational love based on something in common between the two and something that they relate to each other. They serve each other in a way each one feels that appreciates the other person, what they do for them. Then there's a second level called Ava Rabba. Ava Rabba is not based necessarily on a rational reason. It's based on a more of a deep connection and passion that is l'mayla mitam v'das. It could be like the core connection that two people have. That's not just based on any given reasons. It's essentially more unconditional in that sense. But you still don't use the word tainugim. The third level of ava is when the bonding is so deep that it completely consumes the person. It's not just love, it's a love that is filled with pleasure. The pleasure both on your end and the pleasure, ava b'tainugim, the pleasure of God. So it's a pleasure on both ends. And there the bond is inseparable, where a person is completely consumed, like it's usually used ava b'tainugim on tzaddikim in chapter 9 in Tanya, that they don't just love God, but they love him with intense ecstasy and pleasure. So you can have love without pleasure. You could have a love that's just a love. It's like I don't say passive, but it's like love. Either love that could be like water or like fire, could be passionate. But then there's a deep pleasure where the whole person is completely consumed with it. So in a way, you could say it's like the ava b'chol levavcha is your heart. Your heart loves another. B'chol nafshecha, your faculties, your mind, and all your faculties are involved. And b'chol ma'idecha is also your rotzen, and your tainug is involved. That every part of the person is completely consumed with it. So there's nothing left over, yet you're completely consumed with the thing you love. That's essentially briefly how it's explained. And it's called b'tainugim because of that it completely takes over also that deep levels of pleasure.
Okay, but it's not complete bittul because you need a lover and the beloved. I mean, it's still two people. I guess that bittul without that would be death or something because there has to be a little bit of self in there. Somebody has to love the other.
Well, he said before, there are levels where a person reaches and they will expire. It takes another level of Aveda to make sure that it's contained. You know, the children of Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron,
now I got
inspired
it.
with that type of pleasure. So yes, you need to take a lot of care when you reach that level because you have to make sure it's contained and drawn down. He mentioned that. That's that. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. That really now it makes much more
Remember,
sense.
they all are Rotzeh and Shuv. So they all need, the Rotzeh is the yearning. So to put it like give a very practical example. When you talk about a Baal Tshuva, for example, that comes from darkness, there's a yearning because you hit rock bottom or you're in a state of despair or you really see that your life is not working. So that creates a yearning. That's like a person who's dying from thirst. They're dying from thirst. So their thirst is what's causing them to yearn for water. But the darkness is drawing the light. That's level number one. Level number two is no longer, you don't feel the darkness and the thirst. You now actually like what you're tasting. You like it. You've tasted enough of it and you want more of it. So the light is bringing more light, so to speak. Or the kelim are bringing more light. And then there's a level where you become so one with it that you no longer, it's not even something that it's you and something else. You become one with it that you really want. It's like a fish in water. And that you identify that third level. So it's like the difference between the 3 meals of Shabbos. The first meal, we still feel the work week. So it's menucha from Yegiyah, from Melacha. In other words, yes, you finished working 6 days of the week, but so you feel rested, but you're resting from your tiredness. But you're still exhausted and you just collapse, so to speak. But you're menucha from. So on Shabbos day, it's menucha alone. Now it's not a menucha because you're already rested. So you're no longer, it's not the absence of work, but it's actually menucha on its own. And the shalosh shudas, the third meal, is b'tainugim, ava b'tainugim. That, as he explained in volume 2, is menucha be'etzem. And by day, it's still a menucha that you feel and your sensation. Menucha be'etzem, you don't even feel, you're just so much part of it. You just get elevated into something that's beyond sensation even. That's why it's connected to Elam Haba, Ein B'Achila V'Shtiyah. That's why we don't eat a full meal, etc. Because there, it's like a tainug poshet, Ein a murgish, he called it. A tainug you don't even feel because you're so much one with it. Remember we spoke about the object and the subject. They dissolve into one. They meld into one, where it's not like I'm experiencing menucha. I am menucha. It becomes a state of being, not just an action. So the first stage is going from the dark to the light, from the exertion effort from the work to the menucha to the rest. The second is rest, but you feel it and experience it, and the third is you become one with it. And that's like the Abba B'Tainugim. I'm just quoting really ideas that we learned in volume 2, more at length, where he spoke about these 3 levels. And the truth is, it would be well worth reading it all again, because when you read it now, you see how it's all coming together.
Gorgeous. It's gorgeous. So many different qualitative things go up to that level. And I mean, it's unbelievable the way you just explained it. I mean, oh.
Yeah. And I would add one more thing, which will help us understand the next section. It also comes down to how consumed you are with the one you love. You could love somebody, and you know what? But you could also be distracted and do other things as well. You love the person. It doesn't take away from your love, but right now you have to do something else. Then there's a stage of love where you're focused, but it's not absolute bonding. But then there's a state of complete absorption. There's literally, you're so connected to the person you love, there's no room for anything. You won't hear the phone ring. You won't hear any nothing at all. So he's now going to explain that's why it's called Achdus im Yisbarach. Till now, he was talking about refining yourself. Then he talked about elevating higher than the worlds, which was level 2. And then he said, remember, the goal is not just to have a relationship and a connection, is to become one with. And one means that there's nothing else but you and God. And that's not what he's now going to address what that means in the next section of the Maggid. And again, it's so short in the words of the Maggid, you read it, you can almost lose, you can miss the point. But when you see how the Rebbe Rashab is spelling it out, you understand, wow, this is like a whole real serious process. Just one second, I want to just see one thing here. I keep going back to volume 2 just to refresh my memory. Wow, there's a lot there, a lot. Oh God. Yeah. Okay. So let's read the next section from the Maggid. By the way, it may be worth actually to bring, to get an image of the Torah of the Maggid, just his actual language, because it's not a long thing, and then maybe put it on the group or something. Let's see if we can find it. Yeah. If you can find it and post it, that would be nice. If not, I'll put it up.
Where would one find it?
It would be Torah. It'll be easier for me. I'll find the book and I'll post it.
Okay.
Okay. So now he's going to talk about being totally consumed with something. So he says, "V'yi achdus imo yizbarach." So just, it sounds to me like he's saying that we are completely united and think nothing but about God, just like God does not think about anything but the Adam. His entire focus is on the creation is the human being that he created. So the Rebbe Rashab is now going to explain, what does that mean? So he says, Al derech machshavten she Yisrael kodma l'chol davar. So before we learned that Yisrael olu b'machshava, okay, that Yisrael, the neshamas, rose in God's mind. That was his intention. Why did I build this home? For my children. So he's thinking about his children. He's thinking about Yisrael. That's why he built the world, and that's what arose in his mind. That's the most important thing for him. It's not the house, the creation. It's the purpose of creation. But now there's another expression. The thought of Yisrael precedes. What does that mean? That everything is all around the human being, is all around the person. Everything. Now, this is important to understand. So when we say that the Eibishter created the human being, it wasn't some type of like afterthought. This was the focus of it all. He said, I'm creating a world, but before I create the world, what precedes everything is, why am I creating a world? Because I want to have Yisrael to come, the souls of Israel to come into this world and transform it. And this is what I want. So therefore, it's like the essence of his thought, his core thought is around that. So just as God is focused is on that, he's essentially saying, so too is we get reunited with God the same way that our entire focus is not on ourselves, but on godliness. I believe that's what he's saying here. And then the Rebbe Rashab adds, so machshav Yisrael kodma l'chol davar. So when you see a world and you see birds and trees and animals and all the other species and creations, know that it's all kodma l'chol davar is machshavten she Yisrael. That's how primary they are. Then he adds gam, additionally, liyes hakavona ba'er va'agilim min ha'atzmus, being that the intention of all the oil that God reveals from atzmus, what's the intention? Hushiyeh hagili be'elamis. In other words, all the Eiris above, not just the creation, all the Eir that comes from Atzmus, there's a purpose for it. God didn't just reveal light because he wanted to reveal light. He wanted it to come into the worlds. Like we learned earlier, that everything is there for the creation of even the highest levels of Eir. Next page 1349, V'zeh dafka, and who brings that Gili Eir into the worlds? It doesn't come on its own. That's dafka al-yidei neshamis. Is dafka the souls? Shehein b'chinas hakelim l'mayla. Like he says in Ageres HaKedesh, and we learned this earlier, the souls are like kelim above. They come out of the containers because they are the containers that contain the light, and they draw the light. Ukamoshin is bar le'il, as was explained earlier, be'inyan tzir adam l'mayla. So what did we say before the tzir adam l'mayla? The image of man above. What did God envision? What's that image? Shezeh mash Yisrael ola b'machshava. That's Yisrael that rose in his mind. What is that? That's the kelim. Shein b'chinas hakelim. That's the level of the kelim. So neshamas essentially are the ones that draw the oir. The whole oir is in order to go into the kelim, which is through neshamas. V'gam lamata, and also below in this world. Hagili al yidei neshamas Yisrael dafke. The intention is the gili, the revelation that comes through the souls of Israel. The ner Hashem nishmas adam. The flame of God is the soul of man. Ba'al yodam, and through them nishlam hakavana de nesava kadosh baruch hu liyas leidir betachtenim. Through them is fulfilled the ultimate purpose, the purpose that God desired to have a home in this lowest of worlds. Ulechein b'min nimlach. Excuse me?
Sorry, I'll wait for you to finish. No, I have a question. I'll wait for you to.
And that's why we say, and again, this is just a very brief summary of, I would say, 20, 30 pages that I remember in volume 2. So the Medrash says, who did he consult when he created the world? So the question is, there was no one there to consult. So God envisioned the tzaddikim that will come and bring the light and fulfill his purpose. That's b'min nimlach. So bottom line is, these neshamas lie at the center and at the middle and center of God's attention and thought. So he continues, Shekol ma shecheshev eina ella b'shvil adam. That everything he thinks about is only for the purpose of man. I'll just read till the end of the paragraph already. Yesh Leimer, says the Rebbe Rashab, what you could say that means, that this is talking now, not just the air that goes into the kelim and the worlds, but that's higher than the kelim, even the highest levels of oir. Because when you say everything he thinks is not just what he's applying himself in order to build the world, but everything he thinks on the highest level, like we said, the whole purpose of oir, even Etzem Ha'er in the first place was in order to create existence for neshamas to come and make a dir b'tachtein, which means v'hainu kameishu b'li levush v'hela. We're talking about the air that doesn't have any garment and concealment at all. Shezesu tachlis hakavona b'amshachas ha'er, because that's the ultimate purpose, to have an air that is not filtered and not concealed, but have the full glory of divine light. The only problem is in the beginning that has to be concealed, or else we wouldn't exist. Like he said, we would be completely dissolved. We would completely be annihilated in the intensity of the brightness. So God needs to conceal it and needs to go level by level. But through our Aveda from the bottom up, the goal is not just to go up to a few levels, to the highest levels of air, because all those levels of air, the highest levels, even the ones that had to be concealed ultimately, and those that are beyond concealment, like he's saying here, all of them are for us. So when we refine ourselves, we're fulfilling the very purpose of it all. And that's what God is completely consumed. That's what his focus is on entirely. Al derech, the Maggid continues, Al derech, kol ha'olam lo nivra el letzavos lezeh. Like it says, the entire world was not created only to command this one. meaning only for the person. This is the entire, I think this goes both ways. The purpose of creation and also the purpose of the person is only one thing, to serve God. I have to check what he means by the Magid with that. I'll look that up. No, this is talking about God focusing on us. Sorry. Ukamoi Kane says that Rebbe Rashab, the Magid is essentially saying, so too we, ha'odam lo yilei rotzen acher, rak rotzen echad la'ovav, la'oviv shebashamayim. So too, our entire focus, the person should not have any other desire except one desire to direct it toward his Father in heaven. And when we have that utter focus and that exclusive focus, through that we draw down this that's higher than Kalim, not just the within Kalim that relates to existence, but also that divine consciousness that's beyond existence, completely beyond. Because all of it is ultimately, the purpose is to be drawn down and be revealed. Now, we're not finished with the Torah of the Maggid. There's one more paragraph that he's going to talk about, but I'm going to stop here. And I'll stop here, and if anybody wants any questions, please.
I have a question. It's a little bit radical or controversial, but I think
We'll decide. We can decide that.
Yeah. So it seems like the Rebbe is saying two things here, and supposedly they're coincident, but they're a little bit at odds. First is that he just thinks of his whole purpose of creation is for the sake of man. But then he also says the whole purpose is they should make a dwelling place for himself in this lower earth. Now, we are the vehicles.
And that's done through man. And that's done
I
through
get
man.
it. I get it. But which is more
So
important?
that's the point.
No, I get it. But the question is, which is the ultimate? To create a dwelling place down here, or that the Eibishter wants to connect with us? They're two different things.
To me, I don't see them as two different things. They're exactly the same thing.
I knew you were going to say that.
Okay, so if you knew it,
yeah. When you get to that level, obviously they are the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, why I say it's radical, because it's, God forbid, again, I'm just trying to
put
this
it
in my head.
at all. It's a very simple statement. It's when
No. But if the Eibishter if he's self-interested, he should have.
Anyway, I don't see them as two separate things at all. That's exactly what he's saying here.
I know they're coincident processes, but the question is,
I'm not sure. What's your question?
Which is the highest priority, that we should be connected to God?
I don't see them as two. I see them as interconnected. I mean, what do you mean? God created a human being in order to create a dir b'tachtenim.
Correct. That suggests that the ultimate purpose is to have a dwelling place down here. The other possible ultimate purpose would be to have a connection, a close bond between God and his children, his creation. Now you're going to say they're the same thing.
How do you have a bond? By building a home in this world. That's exactly how you have the bond. Exactly right.
I get it. They're the same thing. All right, maybe it's synonymous. Look, if I say to you that my highest purpose in creating this world so I can have a relationship with you, you're the most important thing. That's okay. It's nice. I'm the most important thing. Then I might say,
the most important thing means a dir b'tachtenim. That's what it means. That you are a home for me. That means you're the most important thing. You're a home for me.
I get it.
You in this world are a home for me. So that's exactly the point. That means being a home. What do you think a home means? A home is not some side thing. It means I'm comfortable with you, and I'm comfortable with you, and that's the point. Mm-hmm. It's like when we build a home. Building a home is like when a person marries and they build a home. The marriage and the home come together.
Well, here's why it's radical.
Anyway, look. Okay. Listen, we can take this afterward. To me, it's pretty clear. I'm not sure you're using the word radical. I don't know what the word radical comes in here, but okay.
Well, I haven't had a chance to explain it, but look, the pshat is very clear. I'm not questioning that. I'm questioning the inyan of whether God is coming to us or we're going to him, right? So of course we're going to him. That's what the whole Hemshach is about.
Did you hear
if
what I said?
the
A
per-
dira b'tachtenim means that the human being becomes a home for God.
right.
It's not a creation of a human being just to have a human being. It's the creation of a human being that human beings should be a home and create a home for God. So that's how they unite. So God's entire thought is to create that human to be one with him, and that's called a dira b'tachtenim.
merge at that point.
But
I
also,
get it.
isn't Yitzchak, isn't that the purpose of tzaddikim? I think one of the purpose of us having tzaddikim to see what that looks like here on earth.
Now that's a good point, but there's only one tzaddik in a generation. What about the rest of us?
What do you mean? God created us all. We all are indispensable in creating a home for God in this world.
Right. I'll take it offline. I'm not having a chance to explain myself.
Build for me a sanctuary and I will dwell among you. Who's the you? The human beings. But we create that mishkan from ourselves and from the world around us. That's the relationship.
I'll take it offline. Everything you
Anyway,
said
I'm
is
not
a
okay,
given.
So does anybody have any other questions?
I think this is the
Not
most
will-
profound. This is the most profound session I've ever had after 9 years. I can't even get over this.
Okay.
It's
Would it
definitely
be-
gewaltig. It's definitely gewaltig.
Okay, so
My
we're
point
talking.
is-
Okay, so we'll conclude here. If anybody has any other questions, I'll take. If not, we'll stop here at the end of the paragraph on top of page 1340.